Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome. Welcome back to our wonderful audience. Yay, audience.
Yay!
For a second in a series of 3 conversations, part of our 2023 literature series, Girls Gone Rogue.
That would be us.
For any of you who don't know who us is, I'm Stacey Goldring, and to my right is the amazing Cindy Edelman. Today we are exploring the topic of revenge in art and literature.
Woohoo.
We're going to look at pioneer artist Judy Chicago, whose revenge started a revolution, and we'll examine author Nora Ephron and her piercingly thin-veiled novel, Heartburn. Cindy and I want to thank the Community Foundation of Northeast Florida. We want to thank Nina
Yay,
Waters.
Nina.
And
She's here.
yay.
She's the reason we're able to present in this space.
This beautiful space. Tyson, Schmick, Janet, Allen, our tech guardian angels. Latrice Wright, who made all this organization possible.
Yay,
and
Latrice.
Yay, and Lisa Martinez-Pechak, who I flew in from Dallas because she had the nerve to leave me in Jacksonville.
Wait, there's one more person.
And there's one more, and that is?
My sister-in-law, Susan Edelman, for getting the chairs and suggesting we get mics.
That's right. And Susan's mother-in-law who made this all possible. Alrighty, I'm going to hand it over.
Oh, okay. As a reminder, she gets all the fun things, I get all the serious things. As a reminder, LiterARTure is a signature program under the umbrella of the Searching for Identity Foundation, which recently premiered a documentary film called Traces. Yes. Traces is about second-gen children of survivors, a group of mostly individuals who live on the First Coast that Stacey has been teaching writing to for
Since 2013.
Okay, 10 years.
A long time.
Wow. And Traces was written and directed by none other than Stacey Goldring herself, and she is traveling with Lisa this weekend to the Palm Beach International Film Festival because Traces was accepted into their, program. Now, I'm incredibly proud of Stacey, and furthermore, Traces can be seen on WJCT for the next, how many nights? 3 nights?
It was on last night, and it'll be on tonight at 8 p.m., and it will also air this week and throughout the month of April for Holocaust Remembrance Month. Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, it is an incredibly moving film, and it's really so well done.
But I'd like to acknowledge we actually have 2 subjects from the film.
I was going to. Okay. No, go ahead. No, fine.
Terrible.
You go ahead. That's fine.
If I could please ask Helen Met and Gloria Einstein to kind of acknowledge, wave. They are featured in the film. Thank you.
And they're so articulate and powerful.
And strong and amazing and resilient.
And just one last thing, a reminder that 100% of the proceeds of LiterARTure go toward the Searching for Identity Foundation so Stacey can make more movies and expand her audience reach. So
thank you so much, Cindy. Finally, please remember to silence your phones, and because when we did a run-through this morning, we didn't do that. And please join us on Wednesday, May 24th, when we will wrap up our Rogue season with our own annual look at Holocaust remembrance with our conversation here at LiterARTure.
Except that we determined yesterday that it was the day before
It's
yesterday.
a little bit this month,
Yes.
but it's a numbers thing, and Helen, you should be in charge of that. Yeah, we messed that up. But we will just continue the conversation, so that's okay. Anyway, Cindy will be addressing the young German artist Charlotte Zalman, whose brilliant work miraculously survived World War II, and I will delve into the German-born American historian and political philosopher Hannah Arendt. We know this will be a brilliant, fascinating discussion, and if you all brilliant and fascinating, amazing individuals, have any ideas or thoughts on topics for our next season, please let us know. You can email info@searchingforidentity.org. And also, we are recording, so if you are listening via podcast or video, if you're on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and hit all the notification bell so you'll be the first to know about our latest literature discussions. And now, it is time to seek revenge with Cindy.
What is it about revenge that makes us think of the Housewives?
And that's the end of our discussion.
I don't even watch them, but my children do. But why does the theme? Sure. I don't. Why does the theme bring up mean-spiritedness, ugliness, violence, retribution, retaliation? It's such a delicious theme for today's conversation, especially when a woman overpowers a man who has wronged her. Why did the name Judy Chicago come to mind immediately upon hearing that term? Well, for one thing, Judy Chicago is someone who has fought the art establishment for over 50 years. Think about that, 50 years, and she's still alive and kicking at 83. For all that time, she has been a warrior for women, and in particular for rewriting the history of art, and in particular for changing women's place in it. And while this, are you ready? She was Phi Beta Kappa, UCLA double degree grad. She had her BA and her MFA from UCLA. She's been treated like the Rodney Dangerfield of the art world. It's true. It was only about 5 years ago that her star began to rise as a result of the reassessing of her entire body of work.
Body.
Okay, body.
I couldn't help it.
Oh, I know. I can hardly. She's going to be saying vagina so many times. You just might as well just get ready for it. In seeking an artist to compare with the writer Nora Ephron, I found Judy Chicago, a woman who in some ways relates well to Ephron. Both are Jewish, or were. Nora Ephron passed away in, 2012. Both were cultural icons. Both were discriminated against throughout their careers. Both persevered in their individual fields. One features work with body parts, lots of vaginas, and the other writes about them, including breasts and necks. My favorite.
Aching breasts, yes.
My favorite. I hate my neck. I love that book. Finally, a fun fact, they both had or have 3 husbands. In the slide you're looking at now, you see the colorful Judy Chicago. Really, that gives a whole new meaning to colorful, right? The one with the purple and white hair, the tinted glasses, purple lipstick, jeans, and I guess you can't see the jeans, but or her sneakers, but she almost always wears sneakers, and she's very petite. And she's got that stunning black lace sequin top on, and she's posing with the creative director of the French fashion house Dior, who, by the way, was the first woman in the 77 years of Dior to hold that position.
Hold on, I love you so much I have to stop because it's
I know, she's making me crazy with this thing.
I'm sorry. Okay, here we go. Okay.
See,
I'm sorry. I'm trying my best.
Okay. I couldn't help myself but put the Dior handbag that has one of her designs on it, and I had to look it up. It retails, are you ready? $8,500. Just $8,500 for that purse.
What is the inspiration for that? What's the inspiration for the design?
Her hair.
No, not her hair. Be more specific, Cindy.
Give me a B. I hope Judy is getting a cut on the profits. That's all I can say. Described as the mother of feminist art, Chicago is someone whose passion and her intellect have made her a hero of all feminists of all ages, someone whose intestinal fortitude, zealousness, and stick-to-itness are why she has endured. Like much contemporary art, her work gives us a great deal to think about, in particular, the conflict of, so there's this conflict about the concept or the idea behind a work of art versus the art itself or the final product, okay? And along with that, the elevating of women's traditional work, craft work, sometimes described as crafts, embroidery, ceramics, etc. Chicago moved women's work from the minor arts to the decorative arts, or you could say even from low art to high art, which in the late 70s, the male critics, and they were mostly all male critics at the time, they couldn't fathom that. They couldn't stomach it. They hated it. And they ripped her and her output to shreds. Nor could they tolerate all the vaginas on the plate. That's about number 3. It's true.
We just have a time out and recognize John Taylor for showing up.
I know. Yay for John Taylor.
John, let's hear it for John.
Having taught Chicago's seminal work, The Dinner Party, to AP Art History students for 13 years, I have only recently appreciated her bravery, her audacity, and her desire to make men and women equal players. Having a daughter in the art business who describes Chicago as thinking like a man and stepping into her masculine, or that she couldn't even imagine feminist art without The Dinner Party, also convinced me to shed my prejudices and look at her through a different lens. So I admitted I didn't really love her work in the past, but having really gone in a deeper dive, I've changed my mind. Clearly, I'm not the only one who agrees with this assessment, as you see from the Time magazine and the Harper's Bazaar covers on the left. You see in 2018, Time named Judy Chicago one of the most influential people in the entire world. And then a year later, she's gracing one of the top fashion magazines. And then there's a picture in the middle of the slide showing Judy Chicago flanked by, the mother of feminism, Gloria Steinem. And Gloria Steinem had been invited by the Hammer Museum to receive their award. They give an award at their gala every year. She'd been asked 3 times, and she turned them down 3 times. But then she heard Judy Chicago was being given the award, and she said, I want to come and introduce her because, are you ready? This is her quote: "You can pretty much divide the art world, and certainly I can divide my life into before and after Judy Chicago." Yeah, that's quite an endorsement. As I mentioned, Judy Chicago is 83 years old. You'll love this. Her name, her parents gave her, was Judith Sylvia Cohen. Judith Sylvia Cohen. She was born in the Windy City. Her father was a postal worker and a labor organizer. Her mother, and oh, by the way, his family was descended from 20 consecutive generations of rabbis. Her mother was artistically inclined, and she was a dancer, but she had to drop out of high school in order to work to take care of her siblings. And fast forward to college, where Chicago won a scholarship to UCLA. And while she was an undergraduate, she took a class in intellectual history of Europe. And she said this. She said, she took this course, and the professor was a respected historian, promised her at the last class of the semester that he would discuss women's contributions to intellectual Western thought. And she says this: I waited eagerly all semester. And I added a couple of waiteds, but anyway, she waited eagerly all semester, and at the final meeting, the instructor strode in and announced, "Women's contributions to European intellectual history? There were none." Can you imagine? Oh, jerk. Okay. These were fighting words, lighting a fire under her like none other, combined with the misogyny that she felt on multiple levels while she was in Los Angeles, whether she was hanging out with the male artists trying to fit in. She would smoke cigars and wear just the most unattractive clothes and big boots. And she was continuously ignored by the art critics. Most of them were men, and they didn't think what she was doing was good art. She even attended auto body school. That's that's the length that she would go to try to learn how to use a sprayer and learn how to spray paint. She even painted car hoods. Judy Chicago determined to change the art world for good, and hoping that it would change the way women would be treated. So in that sense, I mean, she was such an unselfish human being. So on the left, we see her hanging out in the corner of a boxing ring, and this little tableau was created for a mailer in 1970, where she was trying to use humor to announce an art show that she was in, and she was essentially spoofing the guys, calling the scene at the boxing gym completely, quote, inhospitable to women, end quote. I was told all the time I couldn't be an artist and a woman too. And she also fought back by changing her name. I think the quote is on the screen. In case you're wondering, how did she get the name Gurevitz? She was briefly married to a young man from Chicago who had a tragic car accident and died like in his 20s. They'd been married like 2 years. So she changed her name because she wanted to, quote, divest herself of all names imposed on her by male social dominance. And she freely chose the name Chicago. She said, I'm a nice Jewish girl from Chicago, and I chose the name Chicago because people identified me as Judy from Chicago. So that makes sense. The experiences of her misogyny really radicalized her. She started to look at women's literature. She was reading George Eliot, and Stacey and I have talked about George Eliot previously in one of our earlier LiterARTures, Virginia Woolf, which really motivated her to invent a new art world. And then the feminist art movement really began on the East Coast, but she became one of the leaders on the West Coast in the early 70s. And she led consciousness-raising groups. Can you imagine what that would have been like? And she established she taught the very earliest studio art classes on feminist art at Cal Arts. And then she also, with another well-known LSU artist, named Miriam Shapiro, they took over a rundown house in Hollywood they called it Woman House. Woman House would be all one word. And of course, Judy Chicago took the bathroom, and she titled it the menstruation bathroom. And it was all white. I had a picture of it, but it was real. The slide was terrible. I just couldn't show it. But it was all white except for the overflowing trash can. Of course, we all know what was in that. And the abundance of feminine products. And according to scholar Jenny Klein, after Woman House, Chicago really kind of pivoted. She always seems to know when and where to pivot. And she worked with materials that had been traditionally assigned to women's crafts: embroidery, weaving, china painting. She took a class in how to paint china. And her aim at the time was to make a monument to women's history using china painted plates whose intent symbolized radical female empowerment. And she found her monumental expression with the help of 400, that's no exaggeration, volunteers, and it's called The Dinner Party. How many of you have been to the Brooklyn Museum and seen The Dinner Party? Oh, not that many.
Wait, backup question. How many people have heard of Judy Chicago?
Oh, yeah.
Well, those who haven't, you'll never be the same again. Trust me.
Okay.
It's kind of how I feel about you. Now I'll never be the same.
Mm-hmm. Isn't she sweet? Okay, it was 5 years in the making, 400 volunteers. It's a repository, and I use that word because Stacey loves it, a repository of women's history, which, can we say without qualification, is the ultimate revenge artwork on patriarchal society, going back to the mother goddess. I mean, seriously, really, it is. It's an iconic history lesson. It's a tremendous sculptural object. It's a formal work of art dedicated to women. And mostly it celebrates women's achievements and their contributions since the mother goddess, which is since the dawn of time. Initially, it was conceived as a Last Supper, attended by 13 women that she called honored guests. And remember, the original Last Supper was 13 disciples and Christ. So this was this is different. But then what was really fascinating, and there's a great YouTube out there if you want to dig deeper into Judy Chicago, maybe you will, maybe you won't, but she talks about how much research they had to do because there was so little written about women at that point in the late 60s, early 70s, that she in the research, they did a lot of research. She didn't just do it all by herself, but it's
Did
really
she reference Our Body Ourselves? Do you remember that?
Yeah. But she discovered that there were so many more women who had done great things and that they belonged at the table. I mean, she expanded the number to 39, and it's everybody from Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh, to Sacagawea, who really Lewis and Clark could never have done their trip without her, and on and on. Now, there are also 999 names written on the floor or the base of the equilateral triangle, because that's what you're looking at. And all the names refer to one of the major place settings. This work is so huge. It's 48 feet by 48 feet by 48 feet. And it's difficult to move, it's difficult to maintain, and it was difficult to finance. And it was also, everything is symbolic in it, on it, around it. It was symbolic in that it could never be erased. Judy Chicago was interested in making a work of art that would, that couldn't be ignored. That's an understatement, right? And the notion of a dinner party connects to women's traditional roles as homemakers. According to Chicago, it was a reinterpretation of the Last Supper from the point of view of those who had done the cooking. But I would also add, gone to the grocery, washed the vegetables and everything else, cooked the meal, cleaned up, right? I mean, that's the truth, and hence the idea of a dinner party. And the other thing that's also really stunning about it and beautiful about it is that it's intended to be viewed in a dark space, kind of like a sanctuary, where each place setting is individually lit, making it look like there are 39 altars. If you go to the Brooklyn Museum, which is really quite worth the trip to Brooklyn, although it's kind of a schlep, but anyway, you can see that they've honored that presentation. All right, and then I just would also say that the table runners, each table setting had an identical utensil and a goblet, which were kind of, not so special. But what was special was of course, the plates. They're very special. And the long placemat or the table runner with the imagery that reflected the facts about the woman's life. Now, interestingly enough, the runners were praised for the mastery of such unyielding materials, and the runners were combined traditional needlework techniques, and I won't go into all those because I'm afraid I need to move along. But the plates weren't so much admired, and I mean I could say any guesses why, but I won't. And we could have a discussion about what happened after the dinner party was made, but it goes a little bit in a different direction. But suffice it to say that thanks to Elizabeth Sackler, who bought it and donated it to the Brooklyn Museum. It's been ensconced in the Brooklyn Museum since 2007.
And now she's eating off of Chinette.
We're looking at one of the place settings from the dinner party that happens to be set.
Do you know how much she paid for it?
I do not. I don't know.
It's a good question. I don't know. Yeah.
We're looking at one of the place settings from the dinner party that happens to be set for the biblical heroine Judith. For many years, I thought that was one of the best revenge stories in biblical history. But doing a deeper dive, it is not an acknowledged story in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. So I had to phone my niece, who's a rabbi in Chicago. No, I'm not kidding. And I asked her for a rabbinic perspective as I wanted to know why, because, anyway, and she sent me to the Jewish Women's Archive, which describes the book of Judith as a, quote, highly fictional romance. So, I'm just sharing that with you because it was a little distressing to me. So we'll just go about this saying that this is a legend. And the legend is that Judith lived in a town called Bethulia, which was overtaken by the cruel invading Assyrians. And Holofernes is the general of the Assyrians. Judith was brave, a beautiful Jewish woman, a chaste widow, and she was determined to do something. She didn't want her town overtaken, and of course, like a beginning of a big persecution against the Jewish citizens. So, and she was determined to do something about the situation because the men apparently weren't going to be very proactive, or weren't proactive. So with great pluck, the story goes, one night she and a handmaiden snuck behind the enemy lines into Holofernes' tent, carrying a basket with food and drink, where naturally the general was captivated by her charms, unknowing that she had prepared a sleep aid for him in his drink. She got him drunk, good for her, and once he was asleep, she grabbed his sword and did a number on his neck. Whereupon, she wrapped his head in a cloth, she popped it into the basket, and carried it to the gates of her city, where she placed it on a post for all to see. And the next day, the Assyrians retreated, and that's another great topic for a talk. So I just want you to notice at the top of the runner, appearing vertically on either side of her plate, are Hebrew letters proclaiming Judith's bravery on behalf of her people. And her name is bisected by a sword, which she used to kill Holofernes. And the runner, central to the runner, is a bold triangular belt buckle, similar to those that were used on ancient Hebrew clothing. And the triangle here is used as a symbol of Judith's strength and her loyalty to her sex. So you can see why her story was so central to Chicago. And the names on this slide, I don't have to turn around. I'm not going to turn around. I'm not going to do it again. And the names on the floor are women who came before her, whose shoulders Judith would have stood on. So make sure you glance at the plate.
And didn't you take some very young adults to see these plates, if I'm not mistaken?
You're mistaken, and Helen can correct you, right, Helen?
We didn't go there, but we got to meet Judy Chicago.
Well, tell me about it.
It was underwhelming as far as I was concerned.
Underwhelming?
Helen, you don't remember what she said to our students? Remember, we went to this art gallery, and I thought, oh, this is going to be so great. We can meet a real artist, and because we were going to study the dinner party, and she had an exhibit from the Song of Songs, and she said it was the job of a Jewish husband to pleasure his wife in front of all of her students. You don't remember that? I just about died.
Ellen has years of therapy for that trip.
Honestly. Okay. Stacey's going to be so happy because she's wanting to bring that up. Okay.
I'm just trying to imagine nowadays trying to pull that off.
Okay.
Brave.
As far as the plates go, this one is a mild version. In true fashion, she doesn't leave much to the imagination. And this is one, it just so happens Judith fits into the revenge theme better than, say, Emily Dickinson. If you're really interested, you can look at Emily Dickinson's plate. Okay, you can see so I think we're going to move on to Artemisia. I think we've done Judith. Unlike the biblical Judith, 17th century artist Artemisia Gentileschi was real. She was a woman of extraordinary talent, daughter of an artist, Orazio Gentileschi. And because women couldn't be artists back in the 17th century, she had to study at home because, and that's where she absorbed all of her father's lessons. So when she got to the point where she needed some more work on her perspective, her father took the bold step of hiring a tutor for his dare I say, uber talented. She was incredibly talented. As you can see, she's really talented. An artist friend of his named Agostino Tassi, not the best choice because he was more interested in taking advantage of her body than he was teaching her perspective. And he proceeded to rape her. She was 17 years old. She was raped in her own bedroom. According to Rebecca Mead of The New Yorker, Artemisia's father decided to accuse Tassi of rape because he wanted to force him to marry her. Because, I mean, she would have been considered damaged goods. She was still unmarried and not a virgin anymore. And by the way, this is really also just amazing, is that the state archives in Rome have the records of this trial because her father went ahead and brought this rape to trial, and she had the unenviable position of being tortured during the trial to see if she was telling the truth by having her fingers wrapped with cords and progressively tightened like thumb screws. Imagine, she's an artist. And Tassi, however, was found guilty of raping her, but whether or not he served his time or paid the fine that he got is debatable. Nor did he marry her because he was already married to someone else. Yeah.
Very busy.
So Mead reports this too, quote, recent scholarship contends that the crime of rape had different cultural connotations than it does now. And Helen, I would have think that you would really be interested. And it's just so interesting from an art historical perspective that that rape now has a different cultural thinking in terms it was understood less as a violent act against a woman than as a besmirching of her family's honor. And so in the trial records, Artemisia was more upset about being dishonored than having been assaulted. But once that happened, her father had to get her out of Rome, and he sent her to Florence. He arranged for her to be married to a lesser artist that she really wasn't in love with, and she had a child, but then she managed to leave him and move all over Italy. She painted for kings, for Medicis, for other noblemen, and she became known for re-examining biblical stories from a feminine point of view. One of the things I learned in preparation for this talk is that she befriended Galileo, and in that the one image on the right where the blood is like coming out like a geyser, they say she might have used one of his theories to base how she painted it. And she was the first woman member in the Florence Accademia of Disegno, meaning the Academy of Drawing, which is still in existence. So we're looking at her at her dynamic works of Judith overpowering Holofernes. But this is really important. I don't want to reduce her art to just these two images, okay? These happen to be more autobiographical, but she painted a lot of other beautiful work. And she imbues all her works with the skill of Cecil B. DeMille, lights, camera, action, drama. She's a model of what we call Baroque authority, lots of diagonals, lots of twisting and turning. I know I'm not supposed to twist. Drama, and the handmaid who's got the hanky over her nose. She's about ready she's gagging. Blood-drenched sheets, the sword representing a crucifix, the Assyrian general waking up at the moment he's being struck, and his eyes and his mouth agape. And then here's a word for dinner tonight when you go home and anybody asks you, did you learn anything at LiterARTure? The term tenebrism, meaning that, tenebrism was really developed by the great master of the Baroque, Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, and it's using such extreme variations of light and dark. It is as though the figures seem to emerge from the dark. So that's what we're looking at here. Judith in blue, strong, capable, steady, calm. There's no doubt who's in charge, who's in control, who's the rescuer, who is heroic. And on the right, the scholars think that version, Judith beheading Holofernes, was painted for Cosimo de' Medici, and if you look at both of the faces of the two different Judiths, scholars also think that it's a self-portrait. Now leave it to Stacey to locate a piece of jewelry, a bracelet, and a work of art that's spewing blood, which happens on the right. It's very difficult to read the images on the bracelet, but of course art historians, they don't have much else to do than try to think of things like this. And there's a lady, an art historian named Diana Apostolos Capodona. She makes a guess. She ventures that it's a series of cameos that show Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt and the moon, and she's supposed to be a precursor of the Virgin Mary, Judith, and the artist herself. So I think that's pretty cool. A truly masterful painter who created the work that is physically shocking. Her works are physically shocking. And now you can see why Judy Chicago invited Artemisia to the dinner party. Uh-oh. Okay, and we're going to just look at a couple more, and then we're going to turn it over to our ever wonderful Stacey Goldring. So as we have learned, the story of Judith was a popular one in the Baroque and also earlier periods. Now I couldn't resist with this iteration of another Judith, a contemporary one by Cindy Sherman, one of the most successful, highly praised artists of the 20th and 21st centuries. On the left is her 1990 photograph, and it's just untitled, number 228, and it's at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And on the right, Sandro Botticelli's Judith leaving the tent of Holofernes, late 15th century Italy. And you talk about contrasts, and Sherman's photos continuously ask us questions. She satirizes her sources and the attitudes that they reflect, and she purposely is just filling these photographs with so much artifice. And I guess when I used to teach AP art history, I would say to the students, what is the essential question? And so for here's the essential question, and maybe some of you could come up with a better one, probably you could, but should we trust her? Okay, so I just want you to look. Notice that she chose to use a male painter's version to counter Judith in this image on the screen. So is she making fun of the painting of Judith by the great 15th century Renaissance master Botticelli? Or is it a portraiture that she is? Is it portraiture that she's mocking? Or is she attacking the old masters because they were men? And the fact that she numbered this series should tell us that she wants us to do all the figuring out of all this. So she grew up during the 60s and 70s. I don't need to go through all that in terms of Vietnam and feminist social movement and the civil rights movement and the early years of television. As a child, she loved to dress up. She still does. Obviously, she still does. And we're looking at her history series, which really isn't what really made her start. But I need to wrap things up a little bit. In her history series, where this photo represents, she's taking on the art historical patriarchy. Everyone from Hans Holbein, who painted Henry VIII, and Raphael, Caravaggio, to Fragonard, just a few. There are about 35 of them. And it's a huge photo. It's 7 foot by 4 foot, where everything seems patched together. There's so much bad prosthetics going on in this work. Wigs and a mask and heavy theatrical makeup. She loves nothing better than overturning the traditional feminine use of makeup for the benefit of the male gaze. But it's all meant to be fake. And according to MoMA, where it resides, they say, quote, by revealing her disguise, she demonstrates that her pictures are constructs, okay? She demonstrates that her pictures are constructs. Through them, she draws attention to the staged nature of historical portrait paintings while playfully mocking the discipline of art history. But just think of this. So what was considered ideal, that is the Botticelli, we're talking about the Renaissance. You can't get much more ideal than that. So she's saying now that the ideal is, and what was considered ideal is now humorous, satirical, mocking, and a distortion of an old master. I just think she's so brilliant. She's just really sharp. Although, I shouldn't have said that, but anyway, although she maintains she is not the subject, she is the posed figure in the guise of Judith. Her head is she's dressed up in all of her photographs. Her head is slightly angled, she stares impassively ahead, and we cannot read her expression, but we have to wonder, what the heck is she thinking after obviously committing a murder? She's wrapped in cheap, shiny red fabric with an obvious poochy belly, standing in front of a mishmash of different brocaded curtains. She mimics Botticelli's open tent in a cheaper, sleazier way, holding in one hand what appears to be a mask of a thoroughly disgusting shriveled face with bulging eyes and a wrinkled pate, and along with a very large, pointy, exaggerated nose. And in the other blood-stained hand, a small knife, proclaiming she did it. Further, by placing Judith atop a mound of dirt, so she's standing on top of like a big pile of dirt, Sherman gives primacy to those giant feet that appear too big for her body. They probably were clowns, clown's feet. She did a whole series of clowns. She did a whole series of women who, older women who had lots of things done to themselves. And here, on the contrary, Botticelli's Judith, who looks like she's straight out of Renaissance central casting, shows no blood, or is in any way grotesque. And I'm just being funny, I know sometimes it's fun to be especially lighthearted here, but although her thighs do seem unusually enlarged, like she could play defense for the Jaguars, I'm just saying. And back to serious. Well, they do. Don't you think they look too big? I mean, and this is the same kind of sensuous S-curve that you saw this is the artist who painted, Venus on the half shell, aka, the birth of Venus, and then also, spring or primavera. It's that same beautiful, sensuous body that, just seems to have no end. Yeah, but okay, both of these Judiths look pregnant, although scholars have debated whether this is a nod to the Virgin Mary, and it very well could be, or whether it is referencing a reference to Renaissance fashions, because back then, the Renaissance woman would have had more of an outfit or a dress, would be dressed in that manner. So here's the thing. In the end, Sherman has forced us to think of Judith in a completely different way than Artemisia. That's an understatement, right? And the debt of gratitude is owed to Judy Chicago and the door that she opened for Sherman and a lot of others to make art with a feminine point of view. And we're going to end on another contemporary Judith, made in 2012 by the black artist Kehinde Wiley. You may know Wiley because, I'm not turning. Wiley painted the 44th president of the United States, Barack Obama's portrait. Fascinating guy. He has an MFA from Yale. And he's known for his art historical paintings. And he chooses his models up until the time he painted this series of women. He only painted young black males, and they're so fantastic. What he does is it's called street casting. He goes to a street wherever he is, Brooklyn or California. He's so successful. He's got studios.
Has some Kehinde Wileys.
He's got studios all over the world, and he even did a series. I saw some of his works in L.A. at one of the Jewish museums there, of young, dark-skinned boys from Israel. So he picks people he thinks that have an interesting face, and then he lets them choose which classical painting they want to be, and in what pose they want to be. So I've seen young man dressed, painted as Napoleon or a deposed Christ or even John D. Rockefeller, and they're very large and they're always set against these very lush floral patterns. So we'll close with this Judith, because it really is. It brings us to almost current day. I mean, even though it's maybe 11 years old, but still, you see Judith is now a black woman, and he met this woman in front of a shopping mall in Brooklyn, New York, and he just loved her presence, and she's so powerful. And at the time, he had a deal going with the designer of Givenchy, so she's wearing a strapless navy blue Givenchy, a haute couture dress. I know, really, it's so amazing and shocking. And the other thing is that she's got this dynamic pose, and she's elegant head to toe, and plenty of powder blue, or she's got blue makeup, eyeshadow,
good thighs,
and she's got her skin looks like she's either just had a facial or maybe she's had a massage. But anyway, the main thing is she's not one that you want to trifle with. But I hope you notice that in this instance, he's turned the Assyrian general into a white woman, and it's one of his assistants. So he has subverted all the constructs we've learned about today: race, gender, and the history of art. But I think what distinguishes Kenda Wiley is the fact that he is trying to rewrite art history because he wants to put in the art history the people who've been left out of it. And he says that what I'm doing is playing with the language of power that has existed in Western easel painting for hundreds of years, and I'm trying to use certain aspects of that to my own purposes. There's a great deal more to get into with this intriguing artist. I hope you all have been challenged, inspired, and even provoked by the works of these artists today. And now we have the great privilege and pleasure of hearing from, I can turn my neck, Stacey.
I do, as Cindy and I were preparing for this, we started to have conversations about words, surprise, and the idea of the word woman, gender, male, masculine, feminine, and we don't know if we are already archaic or obsolete.
We don't know, we are archaic.
Excuse me, it's girls gone rogue.
We said girls gone rogue, and I didn't even realize that was not, that's why it's about us.
I don't know, is what I'm saying is I don't know, so I don't even know the context anymore in which we are giving the presentation. You know what I mean? It's very meta.
I can tell you.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I just had to put in my 2 cents.
But we're not trying to be politically incorrect either. That's the thing. We're just old.
Moving on. Speaking of Heartburn. Okay. Heartburn's main character, Rachel, says of her husband, the philandering Mark, that man can make love to a Venetian blind. Nora Ephron's wit, storytelling mastery leads us page by page, and we are in for a wild ride, witnessing a marriage's demise and taking part in the post-mortem. This is not the first time that I've explored books about the implosion of a marriage. Most recently, in my book discussions, we read a more contemporary take of Heartburn, written by French-Canadian writer Marie-Renée Lavoie's Autopsy of a Boring Wife. It has the same structure as Heartburn. Marriage, infidelity, resolution, revenge, followed by rebirth. And I have a feeling the author of Autopsy may have read Heartburn, because in Autopsy, revenge takes the form of the absence of toilet paper in a guest bathroom just when the adulteress needs it most, leading to the ruination of a fabulous Eileen Fisher Lennon ensemble. Our Heartburn takes place in Washington, D.C. and New York City in the 1970s. This is a familiar time and a place for most of us. And for those of us who weren't born yet, I will try to fill in the blanks. Treating the reader as confidant, Nora Ephron includes us in all the betrayal, the self-deception, the humor, the sadness, the leaky breast, the loathing, the visions of murder and reunion, remodeling, and ultimately those first steps, symbolized by writing itself. And who knew, because I had zero idea, that Heartburn is also full of delicious recipes. From Lillian Hellman's brisket to Ephron's famous vinaigrette that lately has become code when posted on social media for announcing to the universe that your marriage is probably falling apart because someone is cheating. But I think divorce is too clean of a word because breaking up is messy and betrayal is crushing. And heartburn is physically painful and emotionally painful. And marriage requires a strong foundation built with teamwork and tending and trust. And we have a faulty foundation in the marriage of Rachel Samstat and Mark Feldman. In Florida terms, you could say their entire union was based on a slab leak. Here's a description from Heartburn's back cover. Is it possible to write a side-splitting novel about the breakup of a perfect marriage? If the writer is Nora Ephron, the answer is yes. This inspired confection of adultery, revenge, group therapy, and pot roast, the creator of Sleepless in Seattle reminds us that comedy depends on anguish, as surely as the proper gravy depends on flour and batter. I find this corny. So I went to ChatGPT. Perhaps ChatGPT can enlighten us. Heartburn is a semi-autobiographical novel written by Nora Ephron, published in 1983. The book tells the story of Rachel Samstat, a cookbook author and writer who's 7 months pregnant with her second child when she discovers her husband Mark is having an affair. Heartburn takes readers through the ups and downs of Rachel's blah, blah, blah. It is so boring. It reminds me of those sad contents labeled Stella Doro in the cookie aisle at Publix. You bite into those things and the words like cellulose and styrofoam come to mind. And that is the same with this ChatGPT. But you know what? Describing heartburn is hard. So I've decided I'm just going to let you experience heartburn like I did. And then we can learn about Nora's life, which will explain a lot. And then I'll reveal some fun connections between Nora and Watergate and Deep Throat and Tampax, and those two are not connected. Mary McCarthy and the group, and group therapy. Missing waistlines and splayed feet, like Cindy Sherman showed us. So, are you ready? Okay. No, wait, one more thing. Let's pause to remember that heartburn is, as ChatGPT said, semi-autobiographical, right? And I found myself repeatedly thinking as I read this book that our protagonist was Nora herself, because first name basis here. And this, which it kind of is because, it's semi-autobiographical, right? But I have to keep stopping myself, remembering that I am reading a novel about Rachel Samstat, not Nora. So even though Nora wrote it, please think Rachel just to make Nora happy, okay? And now, okay, so now I will tell you about Rachel's background, right? She gets along with her father, okay, who happens to check himself in and out of psych wards repeatedly. And one of his many marriages was to the maid. Her mother is a Hollywood agent specializing in little people and people with scars. This is her niche, right? And this woman will not die, okay? They've made their money not from these day jobs, but from investing in Tampax. The financial hit was get something that's disposable and used often. And so that's what they decided to do, right? Rachel describes her sister as the good one. And prior to Mark, Rachel was married to Charlie. Now, it's important we know about Charlie. Now, right about now, if I was being proper, I would go ahead and talk to you about Nora Ephron's writing style, but I'm going to just let Rachel explain it. So here's Heartburn, page 78. My first husband was so neurotic that he kept hamsters. They all had cute names. like Arnold and Shirley. And he was very attached to them and was always whipping up little salads for them in the Slice-O-Matic and buying them extremely small sweaters at a pet boutique in Rego Park. I mean, what are you supposed to do with a first husband like that? I'll tell you what, you divorce him. No wonder the first marriage didn't work out. I mean, and who would want to get married again after that? So, post Charlie, we find Rachel in D.C., where she meets Mark Feldman. Now, Rachel's a dyed-in-the-wool New Yorker and a successful food critic and cookbook writer, and she even has her own local PBS cooking show. Anyway, so we're in D.C. with her, and we're at this party, and she sees Mark across the room. She recognizes him as this well-known political columnist. And just so you know, we don't even find this out until page 70. And this is something also the reviews don't tell us, so I will. That Heartburn, it goes back and forth through time, back and forth, but you don't have to worry because it's easy to read because we are in the hands of an artist, and it's Nora Ephron. So, if I seem to be going a little off course, not that you'll be surprised, but if you think I'm going off course this time, it's because Nora Ephron's style has rubbed off on me. Very much like when Madonna moved to the United Kingdom and all of a sudden she has like this amazing British accent. Okay. So, sorry, as they would say over there. Sorry. So now we're back to the party, okay? Page 70. Her friend says, stay away from him, okay? He's trouble. And then Rachel says, so Mark Feldman and I went out to dinner. He told me the story of his first day in the newspaper business, and I told him the story of wanting to play the ukulele in the school orchestra, and then we went to bed. And that's where we stayed for 3 weeks. Do you see why the magic of the book is very hard to explain in a simple review? So I don't blame whoever published this, and I do not blame ChatGPT. Anyway, Rachel and Mark have this whirlwind romance, and he badgers her to marry him every single day. It's very romantic, but we can understand why she's hesitant. Remember, her first marriage involved hamsters named Arnold, Shirley, Mendel, and Manny, okay, with outfits. So leaving her first marriage aside, Rachel even tells us she has a bad feeling. There were 2 reasons I didn't want to marry Mark. First of all, I didn't trust him. And second of all, I'd already been married. And Mark, he'd already been married too. But that didn't really count, because it certainly didn't count in the way it's usually supposed to count, which means that you never want to get married again. But she marries him anyways because, well, you all know why. Because she loves him. And on paper, Rachel and Mark are a good match. So Rachel moves to D.C., where she laments you can't get good sorrel or a good bagel. The perfect literary couple go forth, and they do all the married things. They argue, they renovate, they go out with other couples, they have brunch, they have a son. It sounds like a good start. So now I'm going to go back and start at the beginning of the book. Rachel is no longer in D.C. She is now at her dad's apartment in New York, addressing us, the reader, as if she's catching us up all on this affair that she just discovers. I'd gotten the shuttle to New York a few hours after discovering the affair, which I learned about from this really disgusting inscription to my husband in a children's book of songs that she'd given him. Children's songs. Now you can sing these songs to Sam was part of the disgusting inscription. I cannot begin to tell you how that sent me up the wall. The idea of my 2-year-old child, my baby, involved in some dopey, inscriptive way in this affair with my husband, a fairly short person. And Thelma Rice, a fairly tall person with a long neck as long as your arm, and a nose as long as a thumb. And you should see her legs, never mind her feet, which are kind of splayed. Now, although no one in D.C. found the discovery of the affairs breaking news, Rachel explains her personal shock on page 64. When something like this happens, you suddenly have no sense of reality at all. You've lost a piece of your past. The infidelity itself is small potatoes compared to the low-level brain damage that results when a whole chunk of your life turns out to have been completely different from what you thought it was. It becomes impossible to look at anything that's happened without wondering what was really going on. See the couple? See the couple with the baby? See the couple with the baby having another baby? What's wrong with this picture? Everything as it happens. When something like this has gone wrong in a marriage, many couples go to therapy. In fact, when Rachel discovers the sappy inscription on that children's book of songs, she calls Mark where? At his therapist. I'll let Rachel tell it on page 12. After I found the book with the disgusting inscription in it, I called Mark at his shrink's. He goes to this Guatemalan shrink over in Alexandria who looks like Carmen Miranda and has a dog named Pepito. Come home immediately, I said. I know about you and Thelma Rice. Mark did not come home immediately. He came home 2 hours later because, and are you ready for this? Thelma Rice was also at the shrink's. They were having a double session at the family rate. I did not know this at the time. Not only did Thelma Rice and Mark see Dr. Valdez and her Chihuahua Pepito once a week, but so did Thelma's husband, Jonathan Rice, the Undersecretary of State for Middle Eastern Affairs. Mark and Thelma saw Chiquita Banana together, and Jonathan Rice saw her alone. And that man has something to do with peace in the Middle East? Okay, now a public service announcement is now in order. Clearly, in today's world, many people find the reference to Dr. Valdez as Chiquita Banana is offensive because they are yet to understand the context and the value of reading something and understanding context, humor, a time, and a place. So it is best to share with every reader, listener, and viewer that what we have experienced was satirical wit. This is satirical wit. It is creative pain and anger spit like flack out of Nora Ephron's pen. Nora cannot be canceled because no one can prove a negative because she's dead. Okay? But in her 1978 book, Scribble, Scribble, Chapter 10, she has something to say about our culture's need to achieve utter, boring, vanilla banality. Quote, I am continually fascinated at the difficulty intelligent people have in distinguishing what is controversial from what is merely offensive. Okay, that's the end of my PSA. That's how I feel. Okay, now back to Heartburn. We have Mark, Thelma, and Jonathan doing their group therapy at the shrinks, and then we have Rachel returning to the city for her own group therapy so she can share with her group what happened with her and Mark. So are you keeping up? Do you know where all this is leading? Well, if you guessed armed robbery, you'd be correct. Only Rachel could be held at gunpoint during group and have the nerve to tell the robber not to say something he doesn't mean. Only Nora Ephron could have Rachel elected group spokesman to inform the therapist, named Vera, that they all feel she needs to get a divorce because her healthy marriage is very hard on everyone else in the group. This thin book is packed with these anecdotes, humorous, bitter, and sweet. So does group therapy work for Rachel? Does family therapy work for Mark and Thelma? Do Mark and Rachel reconcile? Well, the essential question is, would you? So here's Rachel on page 43 in her dad's apartment, worrying about real concerns. Mark would turn up eventually, but what if he didn't? What would I do? Where would I live? How much money would I need? Who would sleep with me? The last question interested me deeply because I couldn't imagine that I'd ever be normal again. I would be 7 months pregnant forever. Practical, funny, and poignant. Here's Rachel in labor with Mark right there at her side. And P.S. This is hours after she is spying at Thelma and Mark in their backyard as they are looking for real estate after the marriage is over so they can move in together. He just sat there, helping me get through. He stayed completely calm when the doctor said there was something wrong. Perhaps the umbilical cord was around the baby's neck. He looked so impassive when he glanced over at the fetal monitor and saw that the baby had stopped breathing that I didn't realize how serious the situation was. He just kept on, whispering and singing and making little jokes as they rushed me to the operating room and knocked me out for the emergency cesarean. And when I came to, he was crying and laughing, and in his arms was Sam, our beautiful Sam. And Mark laid him on me, and then he lay down next to me, and that's how I fell asleep. This is not a book about taking sides. It's an honest look at the end of a marriage, and I wish I had the time to tell you all about the unraveling of Rachel Samsted's life, including her taking Mark back, her father running down the street half naked, the Pampers diaper change on the airplane, Rachel's bewilderment that Mark would leave her and risk never experiencing her world's most famous vinaigrette, the Kreplach joke, and Mark saying he's still in love with Thelma. And on a cultural note, reading this book in 2023, we, the victims of grotesque oversharing and the cannibalization of our own privacy, I was struck at how Rachel took umbrage with Mark when he used personal events in their life as fodder for his weekly column. Quote, I sometimes felt as if I were living with a cannibal. Things barely finished happening before Mark was chewing away at them, trying to string them out, turn them upside down, and blow them into 850 words for tomorrow's newspaper. Perhaps someday, when we'll have a revenge director's cut with Cindy, we can dive into all the details we discussed. But we do know that through Nora Ephron's conversational style, she makes us feel we have a personal connection to this mess. And we also know the ending of the story because we know the success of Nora Ephron's life. And that's not a spoiler, that's simply semi-autobiographical hint. So now a few words about her background. She was born in 1941 in New York City to parents Phoebe Wolkind and Henry Ephron, noted playwrights and screenwriters. Meet the parents. They set their dear eldest daughter of 4 up for a challenging love life from the start, naming her Nora after the protagonist in the play A Doll's House by Heinrich Ibsen. Like, who does that? Okay. She grew up in Beverly Hills and dreamed of being another Dorothy Parker. And do we have any teachers here today? Well, you'll be happy to know that she credits her high school journalism teacher with inspiring her to pursue a career in writing. So Nora goes to Wellesley. She's a smart girl. And like a good daughter, she writes home. And naturally, or not, her parents use her letters, her personal letters, as inspiration for a 1961 play called Take Her, She's Mine, which ends up on screen in 1963, starring James Stewart and Sandra Dee. Is it any wonder that Rachel didn't want her personal life paraded across the Washington Post? Can you even imagine? Is it any wonder that when she graduates from Wesley in 62, her degree is not in any kind of writing, it's in political science. I would never write another word again. Anyway, if you were here with us in February when we discussed the group, her thoughts about Wesley will ring familiar. She said the college turned out, quote, a generation of docile and unadventurous women. Nora first worked briefly as a White House intern for JFK. At Newsweek, she applied to be a writer, but told they didn't hire women, so she accepted a position in the mail as a mail girl. Then she quit because she couldn't write and took place in a class action lawsuit against the magazine. And if it sounds familiar, it was fictionalized in 2016, Amazon, in a series called Good Girls Revolt. She then went to work for the New York Post and Esquire and was very respected by her peers. Her humor was also in her journalism. For example, her essay about body image was called A Few Words About Breasts. And this gained her the reputation as an infant Tarib of new journalism. She had the nerve to chastise Betty Friedan, a rather scary person, for pursuing a feud with Gloria Steinem. And then writing for Cosmo in 1968, she wrote such a negative article about women's wear daily that they almost sued. And P.S. that publication, it makes me a wreck. So I kind of hope, I wish she would have. Anyway, speaking of wrecks, we now come to the 1970s. The decade of the worst fashion, the worst design, the worst color combinations ever known to mankind. That was a little editorial there. Anyway, she begins publishing books, Wallflower at the Orgy, followed by Crazy Salad. And then in 76, Nora Ephron marries the Pulitzer Prize columnist and philanderer Carl Bernstein. If you think that this is the Carl Bernstein that she married, you'd be dead wrong. Or this Carl Bernstein, you're wrong again. She thought she married this guy, but she really married this guy. Interestingly, with Carl, she rewrote a script for All the President's Men, and it was not picked up or used, but it led her way to her first gig in screenwriting. So I think that's kind of nice. Which brings us to 1979, and we can all start now connecting all the dots, right? Like in Heartburn, we find Nora, 7 months pregnant, when she discovers Carl's affair with their mutual friend seated on the swing, the British journalist Mary J. She's a daughter of a former British PM and married to the British ambassador of the United States of America, Peter J. Today, Margaret is the Baroness of Paddington and has had a wonderful career as a BBC news presenter and a British Labour politician. And P.S., Margaret wasn't the only cheating Jay Bird. The husband had an affair with their nanny, and he fathered a child. So P.S., they split up. Anyway, the union of Ephron and Bernstein ended acrimoniously in 1980. Now, a bit about Deep Throat. And for those of you too young to know or understand this reference, I will explain. A long time ago, in the 1970s, there was a presidential election campaign. Then a bungled burglary at the Democratic Re-Election Committee in a fancy office complex in D.C. called Watergate made some news, but it wasn't a huge deal. But then, the Washington Post, which is a newspaper, had two amazing investigative journalists named Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford. Just kidding. Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward. These two gumshoe, I'm not even going to try to explain that one. These two gumshoe journalists broke the story wide open into a scandal that rocked our nation to its core. The story was based on their unnamed source that they called Deep Throat. Woodward and Bernstein reported that Deep Throat provided evidence that linked our own President Nixon to the crime of the burglary that included stealing Democratic Party election documents with the intent to bug the offices. Well, congressional hearings into this national travesty were televised live and people were riveted to their TV. My favorite after-school program, Gilligan's Island, was canceled. And in order to cover this investigation, if you're in second grade, those hearings went on for 500 years. Anyway, in the end, this earth-shattering event led to our president resigning under the humiliating threat of impeachment. And our country was brought back from the brink of total disintegration because Vice President Peacemaker Ford, who was a little clumsy, pardoned Nixon. It was an act of grace to heal our injured soul. And we went forward, determined never again to allow the soil, and the integrity of our sacred office of the United States presidency. Although I'm sorry, I can't help it. Although our country seems to have developed amnesia, but Bernstein and Woodward, true journalists, never revealed their source, the identity of Deep Throat. But Nora Ephron did. Quote, I would give speeches to 500 people and someone would say, do you know who Deep Throat is? And I would say, yes, it's Mark Felt. No one, apart from her sons, believed her. No one. I'm almost done, I promise. Remember, Rachel was married to Mark Feld, man. In a 2005 article entitled Deep Throat and Me, Now It Can Be Told, and not for the first time either, she says, for many years I have lived with the secret of Deep Throat's identity, and it has been hell. And I've had to deal with the situation, and I told pretty much anyone who'd ask me, even total strangers, not for nothing am I known for indiscretion. So that ends our Heartburn connection to Deep Throat. So now I'm going to take you very quickly through her amazing career. If you remember Silkwood, she co-wrote that in 1983. Then we have Heartburn in 1983. Then Mike Nichols picks up Heartburn in 96, the famous director, and we get Heartburn with Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson. Ephron wrote and adapted the screenplay herself. Nichols said she cried for 6 months and wrote it funny. In writing it funny, she won. P.S. Yes, Bernstein threatened to sue both the book and both the film, but he never did. Smart man. Okay, then she,
But they never ended up friends, right?
they were it was very chilly in that room, yes. Ephron goes on to write the script for When Harry Met Sally, and then Oscars and all the awards, just awards. Happily, she finds true love in 87 with Nicholas Pileggi, and like her rom-coms, they live happily ever after in Hollywood and New York. In 92, she directs This Is My Life with her sister Delia, who she recently wrote a book. 93, we have Sleepless in Seattle, and this is what she says about directing. I moved into directing for a couple of reasons. I discovered most directors need to be convinced that their screenplay they're going to direct has something to do with them. And this is a tricky thing when you write screenplays where women have parts that are equal or greater to the male part. And I thought, why am I looking for directors? Because you look at the list and it's all boys. It certainly was when I started, so I thought I'm just going to direct this myself and make it much easier. So that's what she did. In '98, she directed You've Got Mail, followed by Imaginary Friends that explores a rivalry between Lillian Hellman and Mary McCarthy. Then we have Julie and Julia and Bewitched. And there's also her wonderful books. In 2006, I Feel Bad About My Neck. In 2010, I Remember Nothing. And I just have to tell you that several years ago, I reviewed I Remember Nothing, and someone asked me recently, what was the name of the Nora Ephron book that you reviewed? And I swear to God, no idea. I couldn't remember, I have no idea. And when I saw that's what it was, I thought, oh, this woman's on point. So, in 2006, she receives a very sad diagnosis, but she tells no one. She tells no one because she's afraid she's not going to be able to get any work or any financing, right? So 6 years later, she passes away, and her son writes about this. In 13, he says, getting a movie made would have been impossible. No insurance company would sign off on it. Arguably, she could do a play, but it would take years to bring it to Broadway. What my mother didn't want was to have her illness define her, turning every conversation into a series of, how are you? At the time of her death, she was working on a play that may have influenced her ordeal. The article goes on to say that Lucky Guy with Tom Hanks was about a city columnist, a New York City columnist who gets a Pulitzer Prize-winning scoop about police brutality after receiving a colon cancer diagnosis. The article ends invoking the title of her son's documentary, Everything is Copy. So to wrap, got 2 questions for you. First, Nora Ephron's vinaigrette, which is page 77. You take 2 tablespoons of Grey Poupon, 2 tablespoons of good red wine vinegar, and then you whisk. You add slowly 6 tablespoons of very good olive oil, and there it is. So Rachel, she's in disbelief that Mark could leave her and risk never tasting this vinaigrette again, right? The essential question, what does this vinaigrette symbolize? I think the answer can be found from a very fun website that I found called The Takeout. They had a great headline. It said, Nora Ephron's vinaigrette is a lesson in grace and graceful resiliency. It's so true. So here's my last question to you. Is revenge healthy? Is smashing a key lime pie, recipe page 166, in the face of your cheating husband healthy? Yes. It is. Because once the revenge is rendered, Heartburn's Rachel teaches Mark how to make the vinaigrette. Revenge makes way for 2 important ingredients to restart your life: grace and resiliency. Now, maybe you think revenge is not an option, and that's okay, because either way, divorce is crushing, and recovery has no formula. However, one thing is certain, and you may have heard it when you walked in here today. Carly Simon was singing the title song from the soundtrack of Heartburn, and that song is called Coming Around Again. Both she and Nora Ephron make it clear that after a marriage is broken, nothing stays the same. Cindy and I want to thank you for joining us today. Please share your comments with us, make suggestions on books and works of art you love, and remember that literature, books, and art always offer ways for us to all connect and share what we have in common. Thank you.